Hi there, Prairie Plant Girl here. Today is the day for me to get my Ranunculus pre-sprouting. So today is March 1st. I'm about 10 and a half weeks before my average last frost date. So we're in full-on winter here. I'm in growing zone 3. If you're in, I believe it's growing zone 7 and higher, you could have already had your Ranunculus planted outside last fall. But for those of us who live in a little bit colder areas where it freezes real hard in the winter, we need to store our Ranunculus corms dry over the winter and then soak them and plant them outside in late winter, early spring. Ranunculus are a cool weather kind of flower, and so you want to be able to have them growing and blooming and putting on their show in the cooler months of spring. So for those of us in a short growing season, we can have a short spring sometimes. Like here, we can go quite quickly from winter, almost it seems like summer, in a blink of an eye. So in order to get the most bloom time out of my ranunculus before it gets too hot and starts to affect their performance, it's a good idea to pre-sprout them. That'll get that the rooting and a little bit of top growth started before it's warm enough to actually get them planted and put outside here in Saskatchewan, Canada, and in a lot of other cool cold winter places. So what I've done is I took my dried corms, and I'll put in a little shot of what they looked like then, and I just took them, dumped them out of the bag they had been stored in, and I placed them into a dish of water. So here's one now that it's been soaking in water for about 3 hours, maybe just slightly longer. Coolish water, you don't want too hot. Like I said, they're a cool plant. And you can see how they've kind of plumped up. They're kind of an odd looking corm, all these little legs, almost like some people say an octopus or like a little teeny tiny mini dahlia tuber or something. But this is what they look like. So this here is the old stem off the top, and this is all their little kind of the corm at the bottom here. So like I said, they've just been soaking here, and you need to soak them to do this pre-sprouting, and even it's recommended before you plant them, even if you're planting them out in the fall or anything, it's just to pre-sprout them and pump them back up again, because like you could see from that photo that I inserted there, they're quite withered up and dried out. So this just gives them the best chance of getting started by giving them a little soaking. Some people say to keep a tap dripping or to give them a little kind of shake with your finger, like to kind of stir up the water every once in a while to keep the water aerated. And they say that makes for a better performance of your ranunculus. I don't know. I'm doing other things. I don't always remember to do that. So I think I ran my fingers through this once in the 3 hours, but it's really not going to hurt them from my experience if they don't get that aeration happening. If you have multiple varieties and you want to keep them separated, then you can soak them in like a mesh bag or in separate containers that are labeled so you know which is which. I just have mine all combined. These were just a couple different varieties that I had ordered. I think one was pastel peonies and one's purple sensation maybe. I'm not sure. I had ordered them a couple years ago, and I'm not sure what's left of each variety, but this is what they look like now, and they're ready to get the next step of the pre-sprouting process started. So we're going to work on that. Set these to the side for now. All you need for the pre-sprouting, once you've soaked them, is just a container that can hold some potting mix and somewhere cool to store them for a while. So a humidity dome or something to keep the humidity in will be a good thing too, but not exactly a requirement. So I just have these old meat containers that I use in my plant room all the time. And I just have some nice damp potting mix that I made up. And it is just damp. So if you look at it here, I can squeeze it. It'll hold a ball, but I couldn't even like squeeze a drip of, like there's not an extra drip of moisture to squeeze out of it. And it'll come apart easily. So all I've used to put this mix together is just some sphagnum peat moss, some nice Canadian peat, and vermiculite. And I actually put a little bit of cinnamon in here. I don't think that's absolutely necessary, but You know, cinnamon's a good antifungal, antibacterial, and it's not going to hurt anything. So I just threw it in here because these are going to be sitting in kind of cool dampness for a few weeks. And so I think anything that can help combat any rot is probably a good thing. The vermiculite is going to help to kind of regulate the moisture. It'll hold some moisture around them, but should take up extra moisture and hold that in a little bit, which this is just pretty much at the perfect moistness right now. Like I said, it's damp, but you can't squeeze any extra moisture out of it. So that's a good thing. So now I'm just going to take this, and then I have my little container of corms, and all I'm going to do is set these on the surface, just like that. So I'm trying to set them about 1 inch or so apart, and I'm trying to set them with that stem part up. So the old stem, sometimes it's hard to tell where it is. Usually the little tentacle-y kind of parts are growing down away from it, but sometimes they're kind of sideways like this one seems to be. But if you just look at the top, you can kind of see like this part's a little bit cleaner in there, and down here is kind of where the soil and that was all worked around. You kind of see how the tentacles are worked around there, so hopefully you can see the difference there. But normally it'll be more obvious with these parts going down. You might even have a piece of stem attached, but you want these pointing down is the main thing there. So they're not going to be growing in here long term. So you're just trying to kind of work them in. Like I said, give them a little bit of space because they should expand a little bit more in the moisture that's in this mix here. And then also when you leave some space, if there is any rot or anything that happens with one of them, it's not immediately touching the next one so that it won't spread as quickly until you see it. So hopefully you can tell how they're in there. So I just have another tray here and a few more corms. So I'm just going to put the rest in here and then I'll show you the next part. So some of my corms are quite small. So these might not develop into a full sized flower producing plant this year, or they might only give me like one small bloom. They probably came off of a larger corm because ranunculus do divide by creating more corms. Sometimes you can kind of tease them apart if you can see different parts, but I do have a few that are pretty small like this, and you might have some like this as well. Hopefully not if you've purchased your corms. They should be better quality than that. These are my own saved corms, so some will be small and they might just give me a small plant that just produces leaves and gets energy built up for the following year to create blooms. Most of them should create blooms. This one has a very long old stem on it, so I'm just going to pop that off because I don't want that to be soaking up moisture and encouraging rot. So there's a few little kind of bits of the corm left like this here in my little dish of water. And these have broken off of the main top portion of the corm. And I'm quite positive this won't turn into anything or develop into anything. Now I did have this one here, which has two pieces coming off, and it looks like it has a piece of the top of the corm on it still. So I'm going to try planting this and find out what happens with it. Because it seems like it has all the parts that it would need. So we'll find out. I'll try and remember to update you on what happens with that. Other than that, I just have little pieces that have broken off, and that can happen. So those will just go in the compost. So now that I have my corms all neatly laid out in there with some space between them, all I'm going to do is just take a little bit more of this damp potting mix and just cover them over. We want to cover them because we don't want to encourage them to start growing greenery. We don't want light hitting them and they want to start pushing green growth before they have a good root system. This pre-sprouting is really about getting a good root system. So just covering them up nicely and kind of excluding the light from the corm helps to encourage them to put down roots instead of trying to put on green growth, which could happen if they're exposed to light. A little bit more mix here. So now all I'm going to do with these is I'm going to put them somewhere that can keep a nice temperature between 4 and 10 degrees Celsius. That is what they want to set down roots. Like I said, these are a cool season plant. So they like those cool temperatures. They don't want to be freezing. So do not put them anywhere where they will freeze. But a 4 to 10 degrees Celsius range is perfect for them to start setting those roots into this nice damp soil. Make sure that you aren't putting them somewhere where rodents can get to them, because that would be just a wonderful little buffet you just set out. You do want to check on them every day or two and just make sure that they're still just nicely damp. You could take a spray bottle and just kind of spray the surface if they seem like they're drying out a little bit. You don't want to start dumping a bunch of water in these containers, especially if you're like me and you've used containers without drainage. If you have drainage, that's a little bit better because it can pour out. But remember, we just want the soil damp, not wet. Like I said, putting a humidity dome or some sort of plastic covering over that's going to hold humidity in is a good thing for these, because it'll just help so that you're not needing to add moisture and potentially add too much moisture. And you also want to be looking, and if you see any signs of rot or mold, pop those corms out as soon as you see that happening so that it's not spreading to the other corms, because they're packed in a pretty tight space with pretty good potential in a cool, damp location like that in the dark to encourage more rot and disease. So we want to keep on top of that as much as we can. So I'm just going to set these out in my garage. Great 4 to 10 degrees Celsius range out there. So they should sit in that cool space for about 10 to 14 days before you start to notice some root growth happening at the bottom. So you can just gently go in with a finger and just kind of go along the edges of where you know you planted and just pop up a corm and just have a little look. And if there's some very fine white hairs at the bottom of that corm, then you have some root development. If there isn't, they're not ready yet. So let me make sure I get this back down in the soil the right direction. Cover it back up. And that's all you would do if you didn't have roots yet. If you do have roots, you can pop them out, and if it's going to stay above freezing, or if you have somewhere outdoors that's protected above freezing to plant them, you can go ahead and plant them outside. If you're not lucky enough to have somewhere like that, then you might need to pot them up sooner. I have left mine in the trays growing roots for a fairly long time, and I'll even start to, after a while, expose them to some light. If they have really good root system on all the corms, or most of the corms in the tray, I'll start letting them have a bit of light, and they will start to develop some greenery out top, and that's fine. You don't want to get full plants in here because you're going to wind up with such a tangle of roots. It might be hard to pull them apart, but you can leave them in here for quite a while, or you can get small pots and pot them up if it's too cold outside and you want to get them potted up to grow in a better situation than this is. If you think you're going to have to hold them for a month or so, that would be a good idea. Once it's above, like I said, those freezing temperatures, you just don't want them to freeze, then they're good to go outside. They can handle down to around 2 degrees Celsius. Anything colder than that is getting a little too close to freezing for my liking, and I would put a frost blanket over them if they were outside planted, or a cloche, something to protect them. But that's all you're going to need to do for now. So a couple of weeks to start to getting the roots going. I've had them take up to a month to get a good root system going. It might depend on how big the corms are, or what variety it is, or maybe it's just, ideal conditions. But that's all there is to the pre-sprouting process. So once they've gotten to that rooted phase and they're ready to get planted either in pots or outside, I'll bring you along and show you that process. But for now, this is all there is to it. I'm just going to set them somewhere nice and cool and wait. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.